Hi, we're here. My name is Gay Wally. I'm here with Bromme to discuss his novel, The Triple Heart, and there may be some ancillary noise, so please bear with it. It will be very minimal, but we are in New York City. So Bromme, your novel is mostly set in China, and you have an incredible feel for that country. Now, how do you, as an former investment banker, how did you know so much about that? How did you really feel it like that?
That's a good question. Bear in mind that I lived in China twice in my life. Once when I was very young, for about 5 years. I was a teenager, and I think that being that young in such a place that was so totally different than growing up on the East Coast just made an impression upon me, and I think I absorbed the culture and absorbed the people and their mannerisms. And the second time I lived there was most recently. For the last 10 years I was in China, and that's really the genesis of the book. I started a number of businesses, and I lived very locally. I eschewed the expat bubbles, and I think that when you do that, you tend to really absorb what's around you. And so I think that in large part, that's probably the reason why you have a sense of place when you read the book.
Yeah, you do. And the other part that's kind of remarkable is it's somewhat rare when a man writes so closely the feelings of a woman. You're very good about her being in love, and really great about her capabilities and her independence. What made you write so close to a woman's feelings?
Well, I've always had a feeling that good fiction is always about understanding the other, whether that's, a place, a person, a time. Literature can transport people to those situations in a way that, drama can't, sculpture can't, painting can't. And so, I think that's the type of writer that I want to be. Now, also bear in mind that, the genesis for this story was a conversation that I was involved in, and I had heard about a story, a friend of a friend who had had something very tragic occur, and years later she bounced back and she was able to become the head of a very large Shanghainese corporation. That conversation coincidentally led to another conversation about another woman who had overcome a tremendous adversity in her life, and so. Having heard those stories, I think that I internalized them and sort of worked with these characters in my mind. I sought them out. I had interviews with them, and I think that in my mind, I sort of inhabited these characters for a couple of years, and I came to really understand them.
Yeah, you have a very strong female protagonist. Now, I don't know if the people you interviewed had the same thing, but you've chosen to have your main character be blind, and she moves, she has a child, she takes over a business, and she's alone and she does all this. I don't know if the woman you interviewed was blind, but what made you choose that obstacle?
Well, understand that the main character is a composite of 3 different women. And in the beginning of the story, she's not blind. She goes blind with a corneal degeneration. Now, it just so happened that one of the characters, one of the archetypes for the story, was indeed blind. And I remember interviewing her, and it struck me that the loss of all the senses, the loss of sight is such a game changer. Having to adapt to that type of reality, is extraordinary. Now, she could have very well been a paraplegic, right? And I would have had to have dealt with that. It just so happened that she was blind, which made the story, extremely poignant.
Yes, because she's still functional, but
you know, she raises a child alone. It's quite striking. You have a very marvelous, she's in love when it begins, and then there's a tragedy that happens with that. So she's a very strong, wonderful character. You also have, antithetically, the quintessential bad guy comes into her life, especially when she's blind. And she also has a difficult relationship with her mother. So how did that feel, writing about that? What choices did you make with that?
I think that it was just, you know, the other characters in the book sort of grew out of my asking myself questions of why this, why that, and so I built these other characters around here just to sort of explain, you know, how you know, the trajectory of her life. But you know, you make a good point, and that is that one of the characters in the book, a man named Fen Ming, turns out, while initially he's her friend and a friend of her fiancé, but he ends up being, you know, a real scoundrel. And I think that serves to really further support the growth of her character and underscores, you know, how strong she really becomes at the end of the book. And as for her mother, I think that is really, well, that's a very traditional relationship in ways, in that, you know, her mother is a much older woman and is really the product of, you know, her generation, which is sort of post-Qing dynasty, you know, with the tumult of China and the warlords, and then, you know, the chaos of Mao. And so she has a very long-term perspective on everything in her life, whereas her daughter, you know, is very much a part of, you know, today's generation of Chinese, you know, who are very much into sort of the self-gratification, immediate, you know, satisfaction. And so in that respect, you know, it's a traditional generational opposition. Her father, you know, is more friend than parent, I think, but that's often frequently the case. And I think that some of the other minor characters there are really just peripheral, but they all serve to build her up.
Your novel has a beautiful quality to it in the way that you capture the beauty of China and the delicate moments and the rain and so many wonderful things. Now, did you plot the novel or did you grow it organically?
That's a good question. I think thinking back on the genesis of the story, which was really just, you know, having overheard that one conversation, that idea of, you know, overcoming hardship, tragedy to triumph. You know, there was really no architecture, no schematics, nothing more than just the kernel of that idea, which, you know, I think I gave it a great deal of thought. I did have a number of interviews, but other than that, it was just that idea, that theme, which, you know, I kind of just suffused with emotion and kept on asking myself why this or why that, and the novel just sort of unfolded from there. It really wasn't until, you know, a year or two later that I really began to get serious and outline the whole thing. But there was very little, you know, planned about the whole.
I mean, you outlined
endeavor.
it after you wrote it, or?
Yeah, I did. You know, it was. I was interested in writing a screenplay for the book, and I just had the book. I didn't have, you know, any diagram, and so I thought it might be a good idea. And that's probably putting the cart before the horse. But you know, yeah, it may be very common among other writers. I don't know.
Now, what about this lyrical quality to the novel? Do you think it came out of the story, or it came out of it's, you know, or it's your way of writing, or do you think because it's very poetic? I mean, there are scenes in it that stay in my mind still.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I've heard that too from other people who've read the work, and I think that you know, if you were to read other works of mine, I think you would probably recognize this sort of this versification of prose that I tend to gravitate towards. It's that natural instinct in my writing, I think, combined with the mystery that I perceive in the Chinese language and in all of China, for that matter. And so when you combine all those two things, I think you end up getting a book written the way it is. But I fully admit, my writing tends to be a bit idiosyncratic and often even elliptical.
So you end the story with a happy love affair. What made you do that?
Well, happy not in the sense of, dancing bears and confetti and things like that, but happy in the sense of contentment and fulfillment, yes, absolutely. I can't imagine having made her suffer for, 345 pages, fully, then continuing to dispossess her at the end of the novel. Nobody would ever buy the book, right? I mean, it would be a non-starter. But if I think about, in hindsight, when I think about the tragedy to triumph theme, there's also this undercurrent in the book of empowerment, right? And the more I think about it, the more it occurred to me when I was writing that, empowerment without an objective or an ending that is fulfilling is kind of a meaningless word. And so it really was not going to work if I didn't end it with some kind of satisfactory ending for her. She certainly earned what happened to her, but frankly, all the characters in the book earned what happened to them. Including Fen Ming, and including her mother,
yes,
too.
Yes. And she meets a man strong enough for her. Yeah. Okay, so I think the best way to love a novel is to hear it. So will you read a little bit for us?
I'd be happy to.